New Chargers general manager Joe Hortiz took over a turbulent situation with a top-heavy, aging roster, but he has had a miraculous offseason so far, giving the Chargers a competitive team for 2024.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. And we've been covering this team now for 8 seasons together, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen today. And to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, Joe Hortiz finally got to realize a dream, and that was to become a general manager of a franchise. And unfortunately for him, he was not dealt the strongest hand, but he has absolutely made the most of it, and I am giving him an A grade, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. Also, we're going to talk about some of the fiercest camp battles that we expect to rage on throughout the summer. Right guard is definitely going to be one of them. We also got to hear from Chargers defensive line coach Mike Elston, and he tells us why Jesse Minter is a game day genius.
Which is awesome to hear for sure. I can't wait to see what Jesse Minter can do. And I think it's important that he got his full staff, right? Unlike Brandon Staley, who was the other guy supposed to turn this defense around. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. David, it is Fan Mail Friday, and we have a great question here from Brandon Mitchell, who hit us up on YouTube. And he asked this: I have a good fan mail question. How would you rate Joe Hortiz as a GM from letter grade A to F? David, you gave him an A. What was your reasoning as to why you think the Chargers general manager has aced this offseason so far?
Well, Daniel, I mean, you look at the totality of the situation that he was, that he was jumping into, which was not a very great one. He had a roster that was much older. He had a lot of negative money that he had to figure out a way to navigate through. He had a couple of superstars that he had to figure out what he was going to do with Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. And by all accounts, he was able to make some tough decisions, but also add some high quality depth to a roster that desperately needed it.
Yeah, I agree on all of those points. And when I'm looking at it just from that, the macro perspective, he had to get a lot of things done. I mean, like all of the things you mentioned, but also had to build the team in the identity of his new head coach, Jim Harbaugh. He had to find value anywhere that he possibly could with the negative salary cap situation at one point being $60 million over. But I think the other thing that was really nice to see was like he completely rebuilt the tight end room, which needed it, right? He rebuilt the entire running back room with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. He made smart moves after the draft to fill some holes with Bud Dupree and DJ Chark. All of those things, I think, are the reason why I give him an A- so far as the Chargers general manager, obviously knowing that we'll see how all these moves play out. But I couldn't like the moves much more than I have so far. The only reason he even gets a minus is because you traded away Keenan Allen. And I know he was put in a bind there, and Keenan Allen didn't want to take the pay cut, and I understand why he didn't. But that's the only thing. You trade away someone like Keenan Allen, it's going to be hard for me to fully get behind that. But everything outside of that, it'd be hard for me to kind of find the flaws in what he was able to do. And I'd say the other part of it was finding a way to exploit compensatory picks. The Chargers are projected to have 3 compensatory picks in 2025, a 5th-round pick and 2 6th-round picks. There's never been a year the Chargers had 3 compensatory picks under Tom Telesco. Like, this is a new frontier that he is braving right now. So I think for him to have that situation where he had not only, a super top heavy roster, which was our complaint, that had no depth, he found a way to build depth. He found a way to create space. He found a way to find value in the free agents he was able to bring in and build what I think can be a competitive roster in 2024. Like, when you have Justin Herbert, it can only be such a, bad situation. He gets a top 5 quarterback in the league, which is great. But everything else around that was kind of falling apart. So not only did he have to find the value, but he also had to find value and players that Jim Harbaugh would want. And I think the way that, he did deals with someone like a Christian Fulton or a Denzel Perryman, a Bradley Bozeman, a Hayden Hurst, finding guys that could be good bounce back candidates while also being able to maintain your salary cap space this year and also not sacrificing salary cap in the future, right? He didn't do a bunch of backloaded deals
Yeah.
so that the Chargers can get competitive. Like the Chargers have a clean slate in 2025 and beyond because of what the moves he was able to do. So not sacrificing that future flexibility while also being able to build a competitive roster. We'll see how good this team is, but I think he did about as good of a job as he could. And I also loved what he was able to do in the draft, David, finding value, attacking positions of need. I thought that was another part he aced.
He absolutely did. I mean, when you look at the totality of the draft here, starting with Joe Alt taking the consensus best tackle in the entire draft, and then understanding that you still needed to address wide receiver. You had to get somebody that was going to be an impact guy that you felt like could be a threat anywhere on the football field. Well, you take Ladd McConkey. Then, one of the best picks of the draft kind of, in my opinion, falls right into your lap as far as a fit and just the player in the round and the value with Junior Colson in the 3rd round. Then you get Justin Eboigbe in the 4th, Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart in the 5th. And then, of course, Kamani Vidal in the 6th, and then finishing it up with 2 wide receivers. So you add to your offensive line, you add to your wide receiver room times 3.
Yeah.
You add a couple of corners, and then you get a defensive lineman that is, a very well-rounded football player coming from a big school. So I think you look at this draft and you're like, man, it's hard for me to find any of these picks that just on the surface I don't like and I can't see a potential role for on this team.
And it does feel like the first 4 picks, you're getting guys who can contribute for you in some role right away. Even if it's not a starter in the case of someone like a Justin Eboigbe, like he's a ready-made player that can play at the NFL level in certain aspects of his game. We'll talk about him a little more with Mike Elston's comments, but to me, it's about this, knowing how to play the draft, right? Taking Joe Alt at 5, even though it's a statement pick, building through the trenches, all of those things, but knowing that the tackle talent was going to drop off precipitously by the time he got to pick again in round 2. Whereas the wide receiver talent, there were still a ton of guys towards the end of the 1st round, at the beginning of the 2nd round, went up and made sure that he got his guy at the beginning of the 2nd round. Loved the value that they got with Junior Colson. Also, you get great value with Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson in the 7th round, both guys who were projected to go rounds before where they ended up being taken.
Seriously.
And I also loved getting Cam Hart in the 5th round as well. Being able to get a guy with all the physical ability to potentially be a starting corner for you down the road is a huge get in the 5th round. So I think the big thing was you got, guys who can contribute, and you also got key depth pieces, hopefully, for yourself down the road. And depth is important, which brings us to this next voicemail we have here from Neil. Let's see what he has.
Hi, this is Neil. And first off, Daniel and David, I just want to say I'm really huge fans of the show. I love listening to you guys every morning. Keep it up. And my question that I have today for the mailbox is, after this Alex Leatherwood signing that's sort of helping our depth, my question is what do you guys think that the importance of depth being added to this roster is going to help shock the NFL world for the Chargers next season?
I mean, I don't know if the Chargers are going to shock the world. I think they're going to pleasantly surprise people at the very least. But, David, I think one thing we learned very well during the time of Tom Telesco was how important depth was and why you can't tie all your big contracts up into several players. You need to kind of spread it out throughout the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, I mean, to acquire top-end talent is fantastic, but to me, the mark of a true high-quality football team lies in the quality of your depth. And the reason for that is injuries happen every single year. We've seen it across multiple position groups. Offensive line, Corey Linsley went down. Wide receiver, Mike Williams went down. Edge rusher, Joey Bosa went down. And you didn't have really great answers for any of those positions. So that right there tells you why it is so important to find guys either in free agency or in the draft that you feel like can come in, step up, and provide quality play in the absence of your starters.
Yeah, and just to not have such a drop-off like you're dropping off of a cliff. I'll tell you exactly why depth's important. In 2023, Will Clapp played 702 snaps. Asang Bassi, Justin Hollins, and Jalen Hawkins had to play 430 defensive snaps for you last year combined. 2022, Trey McKitty had to play 541 snaps. DeAndre Carter had to play almost 700 snaps. Foster Sarrell had to play 250 snaps. I'm bringing up a lot of names, but those guys shouldn't have been on the NFL field. Like, they weren't ready. They weren't talented enough. Whatever the case was, they weren't ready to be there. So I think not having huge drop-offs like you had with those guys is why you need depth. And the other part of it is, how many years did you not have competition for someone like a Kenneth Murray, who continuously struggled, or competition for a Jerry Tillery, who continuously struggled? You have competition, you have depth, which is part of the reason why I love what Joe Hortiz has been able to do. But What it also breeds is that competition that you love to see, and there's going to be some competition in training camp, and we're going to get into what we think the fiercest battle is going to be and much more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys about eBay Motors, because passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive, and eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, ref racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for every time. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need, at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins this season with eBay Motors. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. David, let's keep this fan mailbox Friday going. In the words of Neil, we have a lot of great questions that we still want to get into, including this one here from Ed Helinsky, who is a frequent question asker. We appreciate you, an everydayer, who asks, the fiercest Chargers position competition will be blank, and why? David, there's so many different spots you could go to here. What are the ones you're looking forward to watching?
So, yeah, I kind of tipped my hand earlier. Obviously, one of the ones that I'm going to be paying very close attention to is that right guard battle. I think that one is going to be very, very fierce here when, you have Jamaree Salyer, who, was the right guard for you last year, and by all accounts just didn't play as well as we kind of hoped, at that position. So now, with Coach Harbaugh saying he believes Trey Pipkins is one of his best 5 offensive linemen, and we've seen in OTAs that he has gotten some snaps over there at right guard. I expect that to rage on throughout the entirety of training camp. That's going to be a big battle. There should be competition there. You drafted Joe Alt to be your right tackle, so if Trey Pipkins is one of your best 5, then he's got to play somewhere, and he's not playing left guard, so that means there's going to be a pretty big battle at right guard. And then I'll throw one other one there to you, slot corner. I think a slot cornerback position is definitely going to be a battle there. Jasir Taylor's probably, the starter at this point in time, but they drafted Tarheeb Still, and I think Tarheeb Still's game, the way he's able to tackle, his ball skills, I think fits very, very well for the slot cornerback position in the NFL. I think that's going to be another battle that I'll be keeping very close attention to.
Yeah, and those are both starting spots. I mean, I think there's a lot of competition on this roster, and there's going to be some really, really fierce battles, even for some backup roles, whether you're talking about, the third safety position. Who is that going to be? That's a fully open battle right there. I mean, who's your primary backup at outside cornerback? That's another huge question that's going to have to get answered. I think as far as the fiercest battles go, I like Trey Pipkins versus Jamaree Salyer. I think the hard thing with that is just I think you want Trey Pipkins to be pushing Joe Alt as well, right? And I think it's hard for someone like Trey Pipkins where it's he's fighting for right tackle, but also fighting for right guard, but he's still kind of splitting snaps between both of them. How much does that affect him, right? I think another one that could be a really fierce position battle is the linebacker position, because right now this is what it's looking like. I mean, Junior Colson, when he gets back, should be battling it out with Denzel Perryman for the Mike linebacker position, whereas we talked about on yesterday's show, Troy Dye was actually starting at will over Deion Henley. To me, I hope that it ends up being Deion Henley that plays Will and Junior Colson that plays Mike, with Denzel Perryman as a situational, really good depth piece that can come in certain spots and has to be kind of forced out of that because Junior Colson is playing so well. Troy Dye, a guy who has barely gotten a sniff of action in his NFL career, they're giving him a legitimate shot, and so far he's taken advantage of it, getting first-team snaps. So I think the linebacker position is going to be a really, really fierce battle. Who will be this team's Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis, right? That's going to be a big question mark going into training camp. But speaking of position battles, Chris S. has a great question about it. He says, it seems like the consensus is that Gus Edwards will be the starting running back this year. What percentage chance do you think that J.K. Dobbins can win the job in this camp/preseason? Thanks, and bolt up. David, this is a good question. I think we know it's going to be a split to some degree, but somebody will get more carries in this backfield. What do you think the percentage chance is that ends up being J.K. Dobbins, obviously in this scenario, assuming they're both healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting running back title isn't really that important when it comes to these two running backs, because both of them are going to serve, very specific purposes. And I think, honestly, J.K. Dobbins needs to get that confidence in himself and in his Achilles that he's healthy. He's got to be able to stop and start, make cuts, and he's got to be able to do that without thinking on the football field. I think that's very, very important. And I think at this point in time, my percentage that he'll take over and be that number one running back out of training camp, I'm going to say is about 40 to 45%. I think the one thing we know here is that Gus Edwards is going to be that bigger physical type of back. They want him to be that kind of guy. But if J.K. Dobbins is healthy, he's the best back on the team. And I think everybody knows that. This is a guy that averaged almost 6 yards a carry over a consistent period of time in his NFL career. The guy has legitimate talent. There's no question about that. But I think he needs to show that he's healthy first. And then after that, I think it's going to take a couple of games before he overtakes it. But I do really feel like this is going to be a running back by committee type of situation for the Chargers.
We know it is. We know each guy is going to have some sort of a role. But to me, the thing is like if J.K. Dobbins finds the best version of himself, right, however unlikely that is with his Achilles and working back from injuries, obviously he's already gotten back in a great amount of time. He has the whole offseason and training camp to build that trust in his muscles for all the explosiveness and stuff you want to see from him. It's going to be really hard not to give him the lion's share of the snaps if he's playing up to that level. I think the other part of it is, when J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards were together, it was still a split, even in their time in Baltimore. But J.K. Dobbins was the main guy for the most part. They drafted him in the second round. He was the featured back. So I think there's a good chance, if he's healthy, if they both play the same amount of games, that he ends up getting the most snaps. So I guess if you're just saying, hey, who has the most snaps, who's going to be kind of the de facto starter, I would say it's probably around 60%. Assuming he's healthy, obviously, but Gus Edwards is always going to have a role, whether it's short yardage, whether it's goal line. I think he could be a true fantasy vulture if both of those guys are healthy around the goal line for sure.
Yeah.
And I think another interesting thing here is just, can Kamani Vidal have a great showing in training camp and in the preseason to show that he should be taking some carries away from those guys? To me, that's
gonna be important.
Another thing that's going to be very, very interesting as we hit training camp when the pads come on, because he has to find a role. That's two established guys that are in front of him.
Yeah.
He has to really show out in the preseason and training camp to take some of the carries away from those two guys, because they are the two main guys right now. So we also have a voicemail from Athir. Let's hear what Athir has for us this week.
Hi, David, my baby. How are you? This is Athir. Okay, I have this question I wanted to ask. Jesse Minter is the DC for the Chargers. He is going to be calling all the plays. I understand that. What is the purpose of him having all the defensive staff? I hope you can help me with this. Thank you. Love you.
I'm shocked that we've been saying Athir's name wrong the whole time. I thought I was saying it exactly how you were saying it, Athir. So my apologies, but I'm glad we can get it right now, and we love you, and thank you for calling into the show. David, I think it was a huge importance for Jesse Minter to be able to bring his staff along.
Yeah, no question about it. And the importance of the staff within itself, which, I guess is the question here from Athir. Jesse Minter is fantastic, but he can't be everywhere. I mean, he's only one man. So Jesse Minter is the CEO of the defense, right? And then his position groups, those coaches, they're the managers, right? So they're managing those specific position groups. They're going
and
to
I
be
think
the
he
ones...
means like why he needed his specific staff, right? Not just any staff. I think everyone knows you need a defensive line coach and a defensive back coach, right? I think it's more about why he needed his guys.
Well, that's pretty simple. He needs those guys so that he can help teach his defensive system as quickly and as smoothly as possible. You're not getting coaches from all different places. You're getting coaches that were in that system, that thrived in that system, that was a system that authored the number one defense in all of college football. So he's able to bring all of those guys, bring them to the NFL level, and be able to translate all of those defensive play calls directly from the coaches that were calling it just last year.
I think the big thing about this is cutting out the middleman, right? With Brandon Staley, it was always Brandon Staley had to always be on, with his other guys telling him exactly what he wanted from certain position groups and things like that. With Jesse Minter and the guys he's brought in, you don't need that because the guys already know what's expected. They already know what they need. And also, he's the defensive coordinator, not the head coach, right? Because Brandon Staley tried to be the head coach and the defensive coordinator and try to get all the rest of his coaches up to speed that had never worked in his system specifically before. You don't have that with Jesse Minter. With Jesse Minter, all of his defensive coaching staff, for the most part, some guys are from different places, they know, Mike Elston knows exactly what Jesse Minter wants from his defensive linemen. Dylan Roney knows exactly what Jesse Minter is expecting from his edge rushers, and so on and so forth. So I think when you're able to cut out the middleman like that, it helps everything in the transition much better, and also lets Jesse Minter continue to take the macro view of things. Lets him worry about the defense as a whole instead of having to micromanage each position group to go and tell them what he wants. So I think it's huge. I think it was a mistake that Brandon Staley made, and maybe, partially not all his fault. I don't think he was given the leeway that Jim Harbaugh was to kind of get whoever he wanted. But I think that is a huge place and gives you huge confidence that he can do what Brandon Staley couldn't when he had to try to teach a bunch of new guys his system and the players his system, where it's just like, hey, I can keep the macro view. You guys tell these players what exactly we're looking for and what they need to do. So I think that is huge. And I think it's also a big reason why Mike Elston, the Chargers' new defensive line coach, is saying that Jesse Minter not only is great at looking at the macro, but also is the best game day coordinator that he's ever worked with. So we're going to get into that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. All right, David, well, let's get into this final segment here where we're talking about Mike Elston, the Chargers' new defensive line coach, talking with the media for the first time. And the reason we had to bring it up was just because of how complimentary he was of Jesse Minter, his new coach. And I think gives us a little bit of insight, his defense coordinator, who already played for once before, right? But why he likes him as opposed to some of the other guys he's coached with, including Mike McDonald, who he was with as well. But I first need to tell everyone to make sure they're checking out the Locked On Sports Today first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel. If you're going on ESPN or Fox Sports or any of those things, you're not going to get the local experts you get from the local Locked On hosts every single day, who are covering those teams every single day, and they can bring you that on a national level, covering all sports around the country. So make sure you guys are checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel. David, Mike Elston, I mean, it's hard to be more complimentary than he was of his defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter. Obviously, the two worked together last year in Michigan, but this is what his quote was that we had to talk about today. His ability on game day to call the game in situations that we're in, to put the pieces from the sideline as best as you can as a coordinator, to put the pieces where you need them. I think he's the best game day coordinator I've worked with. And he also went on to say, Jesse is just a great game day manager in the way that he calls games. I think he's one of the best I've ever been around. That's awesome, David. And I think where you're going to see that on game day and how that is going to affect this team is going to be really, really crucial for how much better this defense can get in 2024.
Yeah, and it's just going to be nice having a defensive coordinator that's just solely focused on controlling the defense. I really, truly believe that's a huge plus.
Makes a difference.
Also, having his dad on the staff as well, Rick Minter, I think is a really, really cool touch. Bringing his whole staff over, I think it all helps. But hearing that he's one of the great game day play callers, I think gives me a lot of confidence, a lot of excitement, because I think there was too many times where where Coach Staley did not make adjustments quick enough in games. And that's something that I'm hoping we're able to see a lot more effectively from Jesse Minter, is him being able to see something that's wrong, make that adjustment quickly, and then let it pay off, and we see the dividends of those adjustments, because that's what's going to be needed. It's a cat and mouse type of game in the NFL. They're going to adjust. You got to adjust right back. Hopefully Jesse Minter is able to do that.
And I think the other thing is it gives you someone that's going to have the answers at the end of the game when you absolutely need them, right?
Yes.
How many times did we see Justin Herbert lead a go-ahead drive, a game-time
Too
drive
many.
in a game late, and the other team just goes down and scores? Like, the Chargers at the end of games under Brandon Staley were a sieve.
Horrendous.
Like, Brandon Staley was a great game planner. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, but the problem is the schemes were so complex, and he was trying to do perfection every single week, that when one thing was out of place, it was horrendous, and you'd end up giving up an explosive play. The one thing he continuously told us that he was trying not to give up. Like, seeing what Jesse Minter was able to do against Alabama in the college football playoff, against Washington, just dismantling the top offense in the country,
Neutered
just
them.
making Michael Penix even though he was a first-round pick, looked like a fourth-round pick, right?
Yeah.
Like, when it hits crunch time, you have to know what to dial up. And I feel like I just have more confidence in Jesse Minter in hearing these thoughts from Mike Elston, that he's going to be the guy that knows exactly what to do, who knows, hey, I need to keep this in my bag, and I've seen them do this. When they try to do that later, I'm going to exploit it. That's what it feels like he's saying about Jesse Minter here.
Yeah.
I also think the interesting thing he said was playing to their strengths, something that Jesse Minter also really does. And he says, hey, if you rewind back to last year, we knew we were more talented on the inside, more depth, more pass rush ability from the defensive tackle position. So we schemed everything around that. And David, every coach says they're going to do it and they don't. But I love hearing he's like, hey, we did it. Here are the receipts.
Yeah. I mean, hey, you look at it, right? I mean, they had one of the best interior defensive linemen in the country with Mason Graham. I mean, that dude is an absolute monster, and he was definitely featured. You could see it. You just put on the tape and you watch the Michigan defense. This guy was a human wrecking machine, and it was definitely large in part because it was schemed to be that way. You have to look at your defensive pieces and be honest about what you have at your disposal and who you can use to exploit matchups. And I think they showed that they can do that, and they have a whole new set of weapons to do that with the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Jenkins as well, a second-round pick in the draft this year too. I think the thing is that you take away from there is, like, I showed you that I could do it with that, and with really, our best edge rushers for Michigan last year were Jalen Harrell and Braden McGregor. That's a 7th-round pick and an undrafted free agent, right? Whereas you have someone like Chris Jenkins, who's 2nd-round pick. You have, Mason Graham, who's going to next year be, I'm sure, a day 1 or 2 pick as well.
Oh, yeah.
And they based it around that. And even though they didn't have great edge rushers, they allowed 10.4 points per game last year, over a point better than anyone else in college football. They still, over their last 3 games, the Big Ten championship and the college football playoff and championship, averaged 3.7 sacks per game with 2 edge rushers who might not make NFL rosters this year. So I think that shows you that. And then he also said, hey, the edge room is as talented and as deep as probably any edge room in the country. We have to lean on them for that part of it. In terms of what I've seen, it's been great growth so far. We've been working together for a few months now. It's a great group. But that tells me this. We're going to plan this defensive scheme around what is probably the best edge group in the NFL.
Absolutely. And I think that we were talking before the show, it might never be as good as this is ever again.
This is it. Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about like this group 1 through 4, and Jesse Minter talked about it before the season, right? Like, I hope we can keep all those guys. We're like, okay, Jesse, you're not going to do it. Not only did they keep him, they added Bud Dupree into it. Yeah, I mean, can it get better than that? I doubt it for Jesse Minter.
Well, we saw what the pressure numbers and the sack numbers were when Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Thule were on the field rushing all at the same time.
Yeah, they got a sack 25% of the time. Like that
is crazy.
That you don't see those numbers.
And then you add a veteran like Bud Dupree to the mix, and he was, enticed to come play with the Chargers because he was going to be able to get an opportunity to rush with Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa. So just imagine the amount of talent that they have and how they're going to be able to get after opposing offenses. That is going to be a very scary situation, and I can't wait to see it.
It's going to be awesome. I mean, what you have to lean on. Obviously, now you have to kind of find out how to get into those advantageous situations. You have to be good on 1st and 2nd down to get yourself into obvious passing situations and all of that. But Brandon Staley, it didn't feel like he was tailoring it to the strength of his team. And I think you can look at some pretty flawed defenses and flawed rosters that he had there. They went and got his guys, and his guys didn't always play that well, right? But Mike Elston did just also talk about his defensive line group. It was interesting to hear what he said about Justin Eboigbe, which is kind of what we saw on tape, right? Right now, he's heavier on block destruction in the run defense. I think he become a really good pass rusher. He also just said, hey, I'm impressed with the whole group of interior defensive linemen, which seems kind of hard to believe because there's a lot of unproven guys there. But he thinks he can make it work with those guys. And it starts with them. Their main priority, block destruction, stopping the run. And that is what the focus is. Then we'll worry about the pass rush later. Don't even worry about that because we have a stable of pass rushers when we get into those situations. So it was great hearing from him. I'm excited to see what Jesse Minter can do, only focusing on the defense and potentially turning this defense around. But that's going to wrap things up for today. Scheduling note, today is the last week of 5 show weeks. And starting next week, we start our off season for 6 weeks where we are going to go 3 shows a week. We're still going to put out more Chargers content than anyone else that's putting out Chargers content. That's a promise. There might be weeks where things happen and you get more than that. But this is the off season, so 3 shows a week. We're going to try to keep it as spread out for you guys as possible. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday shows, so we never go too long without a show, and continue bringing you guys content, including more OTAs, more practices to talk about next week for the Chargers. Can't wait to get to that. Maybe buy or sell Monday. If you guys want to get some buy or sells in at Locked On LAC, you could do that too. But that is going to wrap things up for today. To make sure you don't miss the show ever, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding the show every day on social media, not only on Twitter at Locked On LAC, but on my Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David at Dro Talk SD. You can also find the show every day at Locked On Chargers, and you can find on Instagram, and you can find the show on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. Thank you to everyone who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. You can always call that and leave a 30-second Chargers question, and you're likely to get on the show. But we'll be back with you guys on Monday, giving a Monday buy or sell, the biggest Charger storylines and overreactions. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.